Before we get started in today's panel, I just want to let you know we're so excited to have you here and especially excited to be talking about the impact that is possible through film. To kick us off, I'm going to show a quick clip of Salam Neighbor.
يلا شباب شباب يلا
التلفزيون هاي؟ لك قطع التلفزيون؟ بلا والساوند
سمعت انكم كنتوا بالمفوضيه بتستلمونه وصلني خبر هيك. المخيم كله مطبوط في مجموعه من الاجانب بدهم حابين يعيشوا احنا مثل ما احنا عايشين.
مستغربين.
اي مستغربين هيك شيء مثير للدهشه.
They're astonished like how Americans want to live seemed like.
Astonished in a good way or?
No, in a good way.
Oh, okay.
لما نسمع كلمة لاجئ شو بنفكر نحن كعرب؟
صار مجبر على الطلعة من بلده ومن داره، لا مع مصاري، يمكن يجبر بس هو وعياله بس بوعيهم، هذا اللي اجبار لي. مش قررت أنا أغادر سوريا، أنا أجبرت على مغادرة سوريا. أنا بسوريا كنت أعتبر من أبناء الطبقة الوسطى أو يعني ما فوق الوسطى، يعني من واحد عايش ببيت فيه كل أسباب الرفاهية لا يجي يقعد بخيمة ما بملك شيء.
So I know some of you had the chance to see this film yesterday, and I heard that Chris Temple, the filmmaker, was quite popular. So we'd like to invite him back along with our other panelists, Chris, Jack Denible, and Katie Borum-Chatu. I'll do a quick introduction of each of them as they come out on the stage. So as I mentioned, Chris Temple is the executive director and co-founder of Living on One, and he co-directed and co-produced Salam Neighbor. He's also raised over $490,000 to provide microfinance services around the world and education programs for communities in which him and his co-producing partner, Zach, film. And he, alongside his co-founder of Living on One, was named one of 2015's top 100 visionary leaders by Real Leaders magazine. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you. Yeah.
Jack Denible. Jack is the senior advisor and communications director for U.S. Congressman Ted Lieu of Los Angeles. His professional life is rooted in a 3-time Emmy-nominated career as both an agency and motion picture executive. He's worked on President Obama's 2008 presidential campaign and has been working to deliver results for the president and Democrats in Congress since 2010. Thanks for being here, Jack.
Yeah.
And Katie Borum-Chatu is the co-director of the Center for Media and Social Impact at American University. She's the executive director of the Participant Media, Entertainment, and Social Change Project. And she's also a professor at American University School of Communication here in Washington, D.C. Alongside that, Katie is a film producer herself. She has produced 3 documentary feature films and over 10 documentary TV specials. She's an award-winning producer and strategist who works at the intersection of social change communication, media effects research, and documentary production. So thank you, Katie, for being here. As mentioned earlier, Salam Neighbor premiered last year at AFI Docs, which is happening right now. And quick plug, if you'd like to check out anything at the festival, we have some more information on the tables out in the lobby. I definitely encourage everybody to attend that here in Washington this week. But Chris premiered Salam Neighbor last year on World Refugee Day at AFI Docs. and was also one of just a handful of participants selected to participate in the AFI Docs Impact Lab, which is a 2-day sort of advocacy boot camp for filmmakers who are committed to changing the world and creating policy impact and social change through story and film. And since premiering there has created and produced some really impactful results. Also, quick plug for Salam Neighbor, tell your friends. It's available on Netflix right now and just had its release on World Refugee a few days ago. So we're gonna cover a lot of the magical things that have happened in the past year and give you some insight into how they've happened so that hopefully you can take some of those tools back to your work and implement them as well. So Chris, Salam Neighbor was one of the first, maybe the first, feature documentary to document the plight of the 4.5 million Syrian refugees. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you. I think you always knew that this movie would be more than just a movie, but would really spark a movement to shine a light on the Syrian refugee crisis. Can you share a little bit about your intended outcomes behind the film and the project?
Yeah, totally. And hello again, everybody. Sorry you have to listen to me a second time. But I'll go even farther back in time and say just, when you look at a film, no matter what, if you have the intention of creating impact, the only thing that really matters in a film at the core is the story. Mm-hmm. And I think for any of you guys who are thinking about even trying to promote your own nonprofit or social enterprise work, or any of you who are in media, the story itself is by far the absolutely most important element of it. And so you can plan for your impact from day one, and you can try to let your story evolve. But if your story doesn't match your intended impact in the very beginning, then you need to be adaptive, and you need to figure out, okay, so where am I lacking, or what does this film better inform in terms of my impact? So I just wanted to kind of be clear that really with story in general, I think a lot of people, especially NGOs, try to churn out kind of these fundraising videos and this content that's impact driven. But if it's not a good story, no one's gonna watch it. You guys aren't gonna watch it on your Facebook or on a Netflix or things like that. So, but for us, when we were looking at kind of where we went with the film, the first step, and as you guys know from yesterday, our biggest goal was to try to humanize this crisis, try to find a way to build a more personal connection to the 4.5 million Syrians who've been forced to flee, who in many ways feel very far away from the National Geographic building here in DC and a conference like this. So that was our primary goal, was around changing minds. And then when we looked at, okay, beyond that, how do we actually take that down and move it into real policy change? And that's where partnerships come in, honestly. The number one great lesson, again, I think that we've learned throughout this process is to focus on what you're good at, and then bring in people who can help you accomplish your goals. And that's where working with Jack and Katie and you actually have come in, where Picture Motion and the Impact Lab was huge in helping us hone what our goals were. And then we ended up actually getting to team up with Jack and Congressman Liu, who hosted kind of the first. Yeah, look at that, we're hanging out there. I didn't even know there are photos behind me. Getting to talk about and understand how to make sure that this film and its messaging does affect tangible policy change, and making sure that that there's actually enough humanitarian funding that's going to the region specifically. Last year, the UNHCR was only 51% funded. Looking at making sure that that the private sector is getting more engaged, and that there's actually connectivity for refugees, allowing them to be more globally integrated, and a lot of these policy actions that are really fundamental. And working with you has been fantastic on it. And then the third, even beyond policy, is moving to kind of on the audience survey side of figuring out, okay, everybody watches this film, but what happens afterwards? And so it's been great actually working with Katie, who helped us put together a lot of audience survey questions in an actual academic fashion to know, okay, what minds were changed, what money was raised, what impact has been driven from the film. Yeah. And I think that that's so key for us to, from here, to analyze, was it worth it for us? Because these films take a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of your time, and you want to make sure that you are driving tangible impact and tangible change
And
out of it.
results.
And that's where a lot of those events have come through.
That's great. So let's unpack that a little bit. I think, Jack, as I mentioned before, has a background in entertainment, definitely knows the value of compelling content, and I think is a firm believer that content is still king. And knew from the get-go, once he saw Salam Neighbor, once we reached out to him during the Impact Lab last year, he could see immediately that this was going to be something that could help change the hearts and minds of his constituents and of the colleagues of his boss, Representative Ted Lieu. Jack, can you give us a little bit of insight into what that partnership was like, how it was from meeting Chris and Zach and Salam the first day, and what you guys went on to accomplish together and the impact that's had on some of the policy efforts that your office has been working on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real honor to be here, and I've been lucky throughout my career to essentially work as a storyteller. And I believe in the innate power of story. I believe that whether you are a change agent, whether you are a content creator, whether you are a policymaker, whether you're a candidate running for elected office, he or she who tells the best story wins. And for the past 9 months, I've been extraordinarily lucky to play a small role in the story of Salam Neighbor. And the story really begins with what you just saw, the trailer in Canon 415 with Congressman Ted Lieu, Chris, his filmmaking colleagues, watching the trailer, and I literally saw my boss, the rising star of the 114th Congress, the president of the freshman class of Democrats, a colonel in the United States Air Force, be equally shocked and inspired by what he was watching. Now that inspiration immediately turned to action. I think that watching Salam Neighbor and talking to Chris and his colleagues really helped galvanize in terms of Congressman Lieu's viewpoints and also the energy of the staff, of the communications and the legislative staff. For Congressman Lieu to really go out there and try to be a national voice when the Republicans, the House Republicans, put a piece of legislation on the floor called the SAFE Act, which would essentially shutter the refugee program for Syrians and Iraqis trying to come to the United States. The congressman was inspired by Chris's work, by his colleagues' storytelling, to vehemently oppose that legislation, and eventually that legislation died in the Senate. The action on his part continued. It continued to raise public awareness, whether it was co-hosting with the brilliant folks at Pivot and Participant, and Chris and Zach and Salam and Mohab, co-hosting the Los Angeles premiere of Salam Neighbor, doing a widely attending screening with other members of Congress on Capitol Hill, op-eds, newspaper interviews, television interviews, connecting the story that Salam Neighbor told to raise awareness about the idea that refugees need our help, that it is in the tradition of the best angels of the American character for us to help them. And that not only is it a moral responsibility for the United States to take care of these folks, it brings home untold economic and national security benefits for us to do so. That kind of awareness also led to partnerships, as Chris mentioned. Partnerships with incredible leaders in the Senate, like Chris Murphy from Connecticut. Partnerships with incredible leaders like Hugh Evans and Judith Rowland at Global Citizen. Partnerships that inspired Congressman Lieu to think about policy solutions that not only greatly increase the humanitarian aid that we give to this unprecedented crisis, but also thinks proactively about policy solutions that not only address the humanitarian crisis at present, but looks forward to try to address the crises that hopefully we can prevent in the future. And what that looks like now is just on Monday. Congressman Lieu was very proud, and working with our great legislative staff, headed up by a great staffer named Corey Jacobson, Congressman Lieu was able to introduce on the House floor a resolution with a number of members of Congress to mark World Refugee Day and to reaffirm the United States' commitment to helping refugees. And I would say that all those items taken in concert, inspired by the great storytelling by Chris and his colleagues, constitutes a huge win. But in closing, I would say that Salam Neighbor exists in a context. Salam Neighbor exists in a context of other stories being told. Stories being told by some who would say that we have to prevent Iraqis and Syrian refugees from coming to the United States. Stories being told that we must profile Muslim Americans. Stories being told that we must not allow any Muslims to come into the United States. And these stories make me think very briefly of something that happened a long time ago in 1915 when Woodrow Wilson screened A Birth of a Nation at the White House. Upon seeing the film and as the lights came up, President Wilson said that it was like seeing history being written with lightning. The problem was that despite its technical superiority, Birth of a Nation was racist and it was ignorant in chronicling and celebrating the rise of the KKK in the United States. So if we're to take President Wilson's words and appropriate them, as really good change agents do, have done throughout history, to appropriate the language of the oppressor in order to empower the oppressed, I would humbly submit that even though Donald Trump and House Republicans have the First Amendment, and if you have faith, God-given right to express their opinion, to tell their own stories, I would submit to you that we don't need any more stories written with lightning. We need them written with thunder. We need them to resound from the rooftops, and we need them to speak to a truth and to an empowering sense of community that motivates us to try to leave our small corner of the world healthier, safer, more sustainable, and more just. And to all of you who are working on stories like that, I would like to offer my help. My phone number is 202-225-3976. My email address is jack.dannibale, D-A-N-N-I-B-A-L-E, @mail.house.gov. And in the words of a great American, Jerry Maguire, I ask you to help me help you. I would love to be a partner. I would love to do my small part to help your stories ring with that thunder, to help your stories ring with truth, and to help your stories make a difference. Let's go out there and let's try to win together. And to that end, I hope to hear from each and every one of you very soon.
So for everybody in the audience,
You're gonna make me cry.
who has ever wondered how you partner with the U.S. Congress, take Jack up on his offer. If you have a powerful story to tell and want to make some significant change, like Chris has been able to, call him. Having spent time myself on the Turkish and Syrian border and connecting with refugees for the first time and coming home and wondering how you make greater change, and not having Salam Neighbor available a couple of years ago when that trip occurred, it became very evident to me very quickly that film and story is our 21st century weapon of mass construction, that there's no person out there, there's no one piece of legislation that can make sweeping change in the way that a story like Salam Neighbor can. But who's heard that old adage, if a tree falls in a forest but nobody hears it, did it really make a sound? I have. Which is why Katie's work is so important and so prominent. Katie, can you share with us a little bit about how you were able to connect the dots between Salam Neighbor and the work that Jack and his boss have been doing, and specifically let us know why documentaries are well equipped to make the kind of social impact that they can make, and how that correlation occurs in the work that you do?
Sure. I'm so happy to be here, you guys. I feel like I might have some grad students in the room or something. Do you have any? Maybe. Well, I feel like Jack dropped the mic, kind of. So I have to follow that. I hope you guys tweeted everything he said. My words will not be poetic the way that Jack's were. But I'm such a fan of Chris and his team. And actually, I just want to say from the outset, what they've done in a year is so remarkable. And it's not just a matter of actually having great strategy and a great story, although they had both. It's the fact that they really wanted to do both of those things, and that is unusual and deserves some real recognition, because I think there's often a sort of desire to see if a film as a piece of activism can make some kind of social change. And if you don't really desire to do that as the filmmaker, even if you're working with other people, it becomes really difficult. So I want to start with something that Chris said at the very beginning, and he's totally right about this. A story is one of the most important gateways we have to this route to empathy and human connection that we have. It is not the same thing as policy briefs and fact sheets, although those work alongside stories. And a story that is engaging is not the same thing as a kind of PR vehicle. It's not the same thing as talking points or let's get in our 3 interventions and make sure people understand that. Later on, you can lead people to that kind of thing. But actually, the reason that matters is because the way that we're persuaded through stories, and this is, dare I use the P word, this is largely about the kind of persuasion that happens when you are compelled to connect yourself with characters that you see on screen, to deeply care about the people in Chris's film. You can't watch that film and not cry when you watch Raouf trying to figure out how he is going to go to school in the refugee camp when his school has been bombed. So that kind of empathy connection is really the core of how stories work from a real evidence-based perspective. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'm like a weird hybrid. So I both create stories and direct strategy, and I also do a lot of research around this work, because I like to always understand more from the social science literature and other great market research about how we actually make change with stories, how we're compelled by stories, and then from a grassroots activism perspective, a whole different other kind of literature, how we actually can surround the story with the kind of activism that makes change. And so generally speaking, they're about what we found in the kind of work that I do. There are about 5 key elements that really matter in both the strategy and the story, and Chris and his team really nailed all of these things. So we actually have a report coming out about Chris's film. I worked with their film team a little bit to help them track their progress along the way and their impact. So we actually have a lovely white paper that's coming out soon, so you all can read the whole story about what actually happened.
And if you want to get the white paper,
yes.
go to livingonone.org
Yeah.
/Salam Neighbor
Yeah.
and sign up. Just
Yes.
turn over your email address. We'll send you the white paper in
Yes.
about a week.
Really quickly, the first is sustained grassroots activism, amplified community. You definitely cannot do the grassroots activism piece of this work alone. It would take a very long time to talk about the partnership strategy that Chris and his team engaged in. But what was really smart about it is that they recognized that they didn't have a story that was just about a situation that was about individual change only. This is a really deeply complex issue about institutional change and also individual change. So they developed a strategy that dealt with both. The second is the role of strategic distribution. I think a lot of times in films for social change, we overlook talking about distribution as a real tool of social change. It's not an appendage. Mm-hmm. When you have a strategic layered distribution mechanism that is grassroots and theatrical and television and now streaming, it allows you to regenerate the story over and over again so that you can actually keep it in the public eye. And the third is the role of media coverage, of course, which is not just about what I call the entertainment moments of the film, but also about the issue itself, keeping the issue alive. And probably the most important is the role of emotion, and that is the role of the story. And so I have 7 seconds, but I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite studies by a guy named Paul Slovak, who had an opportunity. He had people experience 2 kinds of stories. One was about sheer numbers, the numbers of people who are experiencing a genocide, and then gave people an opportunity to do something about that. The other was the story of a single person who was experiencing that situation, and those people in that part of the experiment were given the opportunity to do something. So you all can imagine that what happened is close to all of this, which is that we're really moved by individual people. We're wired that way. We can't really process all of those numbers when it comes to being persuaded through emotion, and that is really the role of storytelling. And finally, these guys worked in a really sophisticated fashion to track what they were doing the whole time. So they now have from survey data. They know how their audience felt in terms of knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, likely actions. They had an incredible range of ways that audiences could participate. And the social action itself was embedded in the story. That doesn't mean it became a PR vehicle, but when you watch the story, you come out and you organically know where the calls to action tend to be. And these guys understood that really deeply. And so there's a really organic pathway from the story to the grassroots activism. And all of this is research-based, by the way, but they sort of naturally understood how to do all of this work. So we wish we could clone people like Chris to do this kind of work on so many other issues. So yeah, no, I've staked my entire career on the idea that stories create meaningful change in a way that far surpasses our other tools as humans. And again, that's not the same thing as a PR vehicle. So I hope that you all feel empowered someday when you're in meetings with NGOs and they say, make sure you get in our 5 points about X, Y, Z, and say, nope, I got to do the story, because the story will empower everyone so much more. Thanks.
So story first. I think we're all in agreement that story is our greatest vehicle to create social impact and even political change. And we're so grateful to be here with you today. We're out of time, but a few of us will be available out in the lobby, and we hope that you all join us at the AFI Docs Film Festival this week here in DC.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.